Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to give you guys my review of this whole new hold mechanic introduced by some of the cards we've had revealed this week in the new Garrison Expansion. And let's just quickly go over the cards because I have not, reviewed them on YouTube yet, so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about, maybe develop your own opinion. So you have here Stolen Goods. Give a random taunt minion in your hand +3/+3. So it's a card that generates a different kind of tempo. Really, the closest cards to this is like Emperor Tarson. So you'd play a card that was inefficient for its mana cost, but it affected your hand, so you could at a later time, have a bigger impact and recover from that tempo loss. Now, Emperor Tarson is a very direct card, like. You have an inefficient card in terms of mana cost, and next turn you instantly recover the mana cost. Usually takes 1 to 2 turns to recover from the mana cost downside, and after like 3 or 4 turns, it's like gigantic. And the main thing that you need with Tarson is you need a fairly big hand. Now with some of these cards like Stolen Goods, you don't necessarily need a big hand for all of them, but some of them do encourage that. This one, for instance, doesn't require a big hand, but you need a minion with taunt, and you need to play warrior, and there's not all that many minions with taunts that are in a standard warrior deck these days. And also, as a lot of us are predicting so far at least, that Priest will take over the meta, Priest has very nice little answers to deal with giant minions, so when you use 2 cards and multiple turns worth of tempo to get a giant taunt minion out, well, that might just suck for you. So obviously this card is not very good, but we can kind of understand how some of these work. We have Grimestreet, Pawn Broker, 3 mana, 3/3. Battle cry, give a random weapon in your hand +1/+1. So it looks like this is a good card, by the way. Again, much like the last card, you don't need a big hand for this, but you need a specific card. Now, just having a weapon, having buffed by +1/+1, that's actually really easy. This is a very solid card, and really what it's going to do is it's going to push people to continue running weapon removal as they have in the last years of metas in Hearthstone. But again, kind of like a specific card. Then we have Beast. We have a Hunter card. Give a random beast in your hand +1/+1 on the battle cry. 2 for a 3/2, but it is not a beast itself, so a little bit weak. But again, you don't need a huge hand for this one, so not too bad, I guess. And we have Shaky Zip Gunner, 3 for 3/3. Death Rattle, give a random minion in your hand +2/+2. So, 5/5 worth of stats for 3. That is like constructed level overpowered. But again, you run into that issue where you don't want to buff up your big minions too much because they generally get removed anyway. So I'd say Shaky Zip Gunner actually synergizes with having small minions, which kind of means you'll have just a few small minions in your hand. Probably ones with like Divine Shield and that kind of stuff will work a little bit best. I don't know. We'll see. And Grimestreet Enforcer. Now, the Paladin ones do, in fact, encourage you to have a big hand. At the end of your turn, give all minions in your hand +1/+1. And it is a continuous effect, much like Emperor. And again, this one does benefit greatly from having a large hand. If you only have like 2 minions, it's fair, right? But a 5 mana 4/4 is pretty weak for tempo, so a fair effect is not going to fly. You'd probably want like 3, probably at least 4, maybe even 5 minions, because you're going to have a tempo loss from playing this guy. He's going to die. Then you need a lot of tempo to recover from losing tempo on 5 as a paladin. So, yeah, a bit shaky, but high potential. The other paladin one, very similar, 2 mana 1/1. Battlecry, give all minions in your hand +1/+1. So again, it works with having large hands, but it also kind of works in hands that you could play them quickly. So if you have a big hand, it usually means you're playing a slow deck. If you're playing a slow deck, it takes you longer to recover from the drop in tempo rather than a fast deck. If you're playing a fast deck, well, you're not going to have much of a hand most of the time. So, a lot of very, very weird interactions where it's pretty clear that these cards don't fit in a traditional deck as we know of right now. And then lastly is it's like the 3-class cards. You can play this in either Paladin, Warrior, or Hunter. It's not a neutral card. Grimestreet Smuggler, 3 for a 2/4 battle cry. Give a random minion in your hand +1/+1. And again, this one doesn't require you to have a big hand, but it requires you to have a hand in a fairly specific hand. So how do these cards work overall? So it seems like the Paladin has a pretty large focus on having a big hand with these cards. And that is, again, kind of counterintuitive. The main way you're going to get it to work is probably by playing a lot of small minions with a lot of card draw. And I think overall that can work, but it is going to have to be like a brand new deck. I don't think it'll just like fit into any existing deck type we've seen in the past. So it's pretty interesting. I do feel like this hold mechanic really is a new mechanic. It's just, it seems a little bit unusual. I can't say weak, you know, it's easy for me to say weak, but at the same time, there seems to be some potential here, enough so that this brand new deck might just be extremely powerful. So, you know, it's hard to really tell. Now, some of the other Grimestreet cards from the other classes, from Warrior and Hunter, don't require you to have a large number of minions in your hand or a large hand at all, but they do require you to have specific cards, which means they're kind of terrible in situations where you have a very small hand. So again, it doesn't really favor an aggressive playstyle. It favors a mid-range to slow playstyle. And again, they seem pretty good, particularly some of the Hunter ones and the Warrior one that buff the weapon. So, you know, these cards are overall very strong on their own, but it's kind of an interesting thought to buff things later on, to hold things intentionally. I think it will create a brand new type of gameplay, but I wonder, and I think overall most of these will fail pretty hard, largely because they're not proactive enough and they're not consistent enough. I think some of the Paladin ones might work out, but the others will probably just be overall very good cards in Arena and probably miss most of the time in Constructed. But we'll have to see. It'll be a brand new meta, and this new hold mechanic is interesting enough because it leads the game in a new direction where we don't fully understand whether or not it's going to be good, whether or not it's going to have a straightforward type of gameplay, and all of these things are generally good for the game. You know, we talked a lot about the new expansion having to introduce new playstyles and that kind of stuff, and most of the time when we think about that, we think about solutions that are very direct, are very obvious. And this mechanic is very strange, it's very ambiguous. It's difficult to really understand how powerful, how it'll work, and really how it'll play out at all. So I think Blizzard's actually done a pretty good job here. Whether or not it'll work out or whether it'll flop like the Inspire mechanic in TGT, that has yet to be determined, but I think we will see a little bit of freshness in terms of the strategy behind playing a lot of games in Hearthstone after the Garrison Expansion is released, at least. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this idea, and I think I'd like to see a few more cards. I feel like these cards kind of play on each other. You know, if you had a 30-card deck with a bunch of draw and small minions that all buff each other while they're in your hand, that'd be fantastic. I feel like right now we're missing a few ingredients from that being a really strong archetype, and with more cards on the way, maybe that'll be the case, and that will definitely be the directing factor on whether this will work out at all. So we'll see what's coming up. Hope you guys are as excited as I am about the upcoming expansion, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.